Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews. I've got to be careful, Chris, because I'm doing two series with... I'm very uninventive. I'm currently recording rambling reviews for for Infinity Train. On Infinity Train, I keep calling it Rewind Reviews because I'm so unoriginal. I gave the two shows very similar names, so I'm going to be very careful. But yes, welcome to Rewind Reviews, where we take a look back at movies from our childhood, either mean a lot to us or that we suspect might be shit, or as Chris feared, that might not hold up to the modern day sort of scrutiny with the film we've chosen today. Chris chose this one. He chose Back to the Future Part 1, sorry, or it was just Back to the Future as it was known in 1985. If memory serves, Chris, your fear was that the sort of mild incest of it all might not stand up to modern day.
Yeah, I was very. There's been a lot, and I've seen that. We'll kick off with personal views about the thing as well, and in that, because I love this show, I have seen it since, Ed Burns' fantastic bit on, would they not recognise him in the future? Would he not accuse his, Lorraine of cheating? And there's also a good John Mulaney bit on Back to the Future as well. So I have seen it since all of those. But, when I'm watching Back to the Future, as was the case with this time, because you get so wrapped up in it, it was pure, it's pure nostalgia gold. And I was like, oh man, I wonder if, reviewing it, I wonder if watching it with an eye on reviewing it will suddenly make that stuff seem pop a bit more, which we'll come back to, because I think some stuff does, and actually I think some stuff, if you think about it, is funny, but under scrutiny, whatever the fucking word is, under scrutiny, falls slightly. But no doubt we'll come back to that. Such nostalgia joy, my god, because this is my, I would weirdly, I thought about this the other day. I nearly texted you. I thought, isn't it fucking weird that if someone were to say to me, what's your favourite film, I'd say Back to the Future, but if they were to say to me, what's your favourite Back to the Future film, I'd probably say Part 2. How does that work? But I guess we'll come back to that when we see Part 2.
It's interesting because my opinion on that has changed this week.
Yeah, well, have you watched? What would you have said? Part 2 was your favourite? I don't know what you've done recently though. Because I've watched all three and then I'm rewatching them as well.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what we've had to do. I mean, we sat down to just watch one.
Yeah, and
we ended up watching all three. So we're now in a position where I'm having to watch each one before we do each of these. But I'll be honest with you right now, and we'll talk about it more next week. But I actually think it's still a miracle that it works, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And it's still a brilliant film. But I actually think in the cold hard light of being more critical about it and looking at it with that eye on it and not just watching it and enjoying it, I do think one is a better movie. That has changed for me now over the course of this last week, basically.
And there's a very big distinction, I think, and people do this, confuse and do this all the time. There's a distinction between favourite and best. As a movie, without a doubt, Part 1 is the strongest movie.
But as a result, it may have become my favourite this week.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. We'll be careful. We'll talk about.
Yeah, we're gonna. So a little hint. I mean, normally at the end of each episode we do that. What we're watching next week, and spoiler alert, we're watching Part 2 next week, and then the week after we're probably gonna do Part 3. The reason that is just because these films link into each other so directly. It's not like Short Circuit, where at some point we can do the sequel. A year down the line or whatever. It really feels like it needs to be done sooner rather than later. So we're just going to strap them all together because, that's the way that they sort of fit, and it's how you end up watching them as a rule.
I'm very intrigued, just very quickly now, we really shouldn't do this, but because I've, not a negative, but distinctively 3's always been my least favourite. Yes. I enjoyed 3 more on the rewatch than I thought I was going to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly how
so
I
we'll
felt.
come back to all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
100%.
the memory. So I literally I think it was like one Sunday afternoon, and again, with all of this, with all of these films, when we do this, there's an element of that you can't say for sure, and it might be your memory rewriting it to something. But I distinctly remember it. I assume it was a Sunday or a Saturday afternoon, and it was coming on TV. And my dad said to me, "Oh, we're going to sit and watch this, but you need to actually watch it. You need to pay attention to it." And I'm like, he's like, "'Cause stuff's important." Like, I remember the clock tower thing, and he's like, "That's important. Like, remember that." And at first, I'm like, I'm a kid, so any film that requires me paying attention is like, all right. But instantly loved and enjoyed it, and we talk a lot on here about like the VHS memories. So instantly fell in love with this film, and then borrowed it. My uncle had a 4 VHS box set which contained the 3 movies, and then the infamous behind the scenes documentary which included Robert Zemeckis or Bob Gale, but I think Robert Zemeckis. Fucking hell, why can't I speak today? Saying about hoverboards being real, which again we'll get to next week. So fell in love again. Borrowed those VHSs from my uncle on more than one occasion. Was like, oh, can I borrow that again? And then one day got like this real craving to own my own copies, and like really like. We're talking saving up pocket money and going downtown to buy the VHS. And I remember my dad being like, "Why are you so obsessed with getting this VHS? Like, you've seen it multiple times." And I'm like, "I don't know. I just had this I just wanted to, when you were a kid, you just wanted to hold that VHS in your hands." And I had that like mad with Back to the Future. And went out and got my own. And then, as we said, amusingly, owned multiple copies, like enough copies for 3 households to watch it the last few weekends and all be watching my copies. So, yeah, I have such nostalgia. And Jess said, like, there was such joy on my face watching this movie. So, yeah, it's a huge part of my childhood. And I would name it. I think it's my favourite. There are always 2, and there's Good Burger, which is just and we'll do Good Burger someday. The Keenan and Kel movie, because of the emotional resonance I had with that movie, in that I was just the world's biggest Keenan and Kel fan, and because of various circumstances, didn't see that film in the cinema and was distraught, cried my eyes out, and my mum and dad felt so guilty. So I have a real like. And then God, did I watch Good Burger a lot. So, but like, there again, it's the difference between favourite and best. And there has to come a point where you go, yeah, my emotional desire to watch it can, that doesn't mean it stands up as a piece of art. Although I do think Good Burger is quite funny, having watched it as an adult.
My memory of watching Good Burger as a more adult, going back to it, being pleasantly surprised that the jokes functioned. Yes. Like I'll always remember, this is completely off topic, but the clown joke will always go down as one of the best. Like, for those who haven't seen Good Burger, there's a joke where a dog comes up to them and the weird character, when the dog barks, is like, "What's that? A car full of clowns has broken down and they need our help." And the other one's like, "Don't be an idiot. The dog's barking because he wants feeding," and they feed him. And then about 10 minutes later in the movie is how I remember it. Like, when you just when you've forgotten about that really weird scene, they walk past a car full of clowns, the smoke coming out of the front, and one of the clowns goes, "Where is that dog?"
Yeah, I don't. My memory is it happens sooner than that, but either way, it's a surprisingly modern joke, and I might be wrong about the placement of it. It's a surprisingly modern joke. Absolutely, and we will absolutely do.
I think we'll come back to that as well, because I enjoyed that. Back to the
Future is it, and it is what I would like script wise, and the way it comes together, I would say is perfection. And I was nervous about the incest stuff, but again, we'll come back to that after you've got a similar love and personal connection, haven't you?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. Before there was Star Wars, there was Back to the Future. So like, I got into Star Wars at about 7 or 8. We just moved to Ireland, and I met a friend who had it on VHS, and I saw the last sequence, and then immediately the next day we went out and we rented the VHS, and I had to wait a week because I can only rent one thing a week. So with Star Wars, I had to rent part 1, then wait a week, Empire Strikes Back to find out how the story ended, and that week wait between each of them, I remember to this day being utterly excruciating. But there's another movie, obviously, that came into my life in a sort of weirdly similar way, sort of 3 years earlier, and was my obsession until I stumbled across Star Wars. And actually, it sort of happened the same way, because I caught the end of A New Hope at a friend's house, and then went and acquired it. I saw the end of Back to the Future Part 2 before I saw anything else.
Oh, wow.
So I'd gone around to like a relative's house. You know when you're a kid and you just get dragged around to various relatives? And my cousins or someone was watching Back to the Future Part 2. And it was the sequence at the end where Marty's at the school. And I was fucking baffled. Someone's calling him a chicken. He doesn't like that, apparently. Who is this kid? Why is he so interested in this book? He's got a hoverboard? This is the 50s, right? What's going on? There's a flying car? What is this? Like, I must have been, 5? And I was just mesmerized and baffled and absolutely wanted to know more. And luckily, it was only a couple of months till Christmas. So I kept in mind the movie, the name, Back to the Future, and I was looking out for it, essentially. I remember, because at that point, I just learnt, just about to go through the TV guide. Reading was, a newish thing, so I was, figuring out how to read the TV guide myself. And I'd been keeping my eye out for that movie coming back up. And at Christmas, they did a marathon of all 3. I think they did anyway. At least they showed 2. I think they did all 3 though. It was one Saturday or whatever, and you sat down to watch it and just instantly in love with the world, the characters, the tone, that music. God, that fucking music. It all just. It really was it was my first cinematic love. It truly was. It was sadly usurped a few years later as favorite because of Star Wars, which then sort of carried me through. But you can't undersell the importance of this film, both to culture and Just as a completely successful execution of tone, even when the story beats are a little messy in the film, and this is across the trilogy really, and it doesn't, the story beats are a bit all over the place and it feels a bit messy. It kind of gets away with it because the tone and the characters and the jokes are all so strong. And it feels so deliberate, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly the words I was going to use, and they really and there's no way. And I'm kind of glad actually that you've seen all 3 as well recently, because you watch this one back, and not only is it the tone and stuff, but it feels planned. And we're going to start with a bit of the history because it's so important to the film, and factors into the review so much. But Doc says, we can. I can find out who won the next 25 games in the World Series, and all of this sort of, look me up in the future. All of this stuff, it looks designed, and it would be, if it was designed, it would be more designed. You'd get a reference to the Wild Wild West earlier and stuff, whatever. But the fact that it works so unbelievably well as a trilogy is a huge accomplishment, considering it wasn't meant to be that.
Absolutely.
That ending was a joke. Literally, that was a gag ending.
I have them on DVD, but we ended up watching them on Amazon Instant because they're included with Prime in the UK right now. And the version on
they weren't because in fact I can tell you now, that's within the last few weeks, because my cousin couldn't. It wasn't available. Right.
Yeah, you told that story, didn't you, about sharing the DVDs around? That's funny. Well, because we were sitting down watching. I was like, oh, am I gonna have to get off my butt and get this DVD out and put the disc in? Am I gonna have to do it? And then I looked because my laptop nearby. I reached and grabbed it, and I was like, open up Netflix. Back to the all right. Open up Amazon. Back to the all 3 are included with Prime. Yeah. Beautiful. And then I literally just pulled up my Xbox and watched them that way. But what was interesting was actually the DVD version I have. Is the box set from I think the mid-thousands, and it has the to be continued over the last scene, but the version on Amazon does not. which I thought was interesting.
Does that mean
apparently
you also
they removed
avoided
that in like 2010 or 2012, around that time?
Does that mean you also didn't have the God Awful one again?
No, we did. Oh, no, on
but-
part 2, we definitely had that. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Anyway, so
trailer. We'll talk
little
about
bit of history, because we figured that so much of the context of this movie is in its history. So very quickly, as a little history lesson for everyone who might not know the story of this movie, Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis had made a handful of movies with Spielberg that had been kind of floppy. They'd not performed so well in the box office. But I think it was Columbia really liked the movies they were making. They just didn't, it just wasn't connected with the audience for whatever reason. So they wanted to give them another chance. So whatever you come up with next, bring it to us. Simultaneous to this, Bob Gale looked back at an old high school yearbook, found a picture of his dad, and discovered his dad had been class president. Now, he actually thought the class president of his own high school was not somebody he got on with at all. It was kind of like, he thought that person was kind of like maybe a nerd or whatever. And I think that's just cultural changes. Like back in the day, it was kind of cool to be class president. And by the time Bob Gale got to school, it was kind of lame to be teacher's pet or whatever. And he wondered, would he have been friends with his dad had they gone to the same school? And that kind of meshed with this time travel thing they'd been kicking around between him and Zemeckis. Anyway, they'd been trying to make time travel work for years, apparently, in a script. So they bring a pitch. They put together a pitch for Back to the Future, an early version of it, and they take it to, I think it's Columbia. And Columbia go, we'll give you a small amount of money, go write the script and we'll see. Now, Columbia ultimately passed on the movie because it was kind of a teen comedy, but at the time, this is like the era of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. So teen comedies were kind of risky. They were risque. they were saucy. They had a lot of like implied nudity or sometimes just outright nudity. They had swearing, they had drug use. That was the tone of the 80s teen comedy world. And Columbia thought this was really too tame to fit that market. So they passed. And so did, and I swear this is, I swear this is true, the reports are 41 different studios passed on that script.
Is this the version, though, where like the time machine was a fridge and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the time machine was a fridge. They had a monkey, not a dog. This is all different. So, but then they take it to Disney, thinking, "Oh, this will be it." And Disney were like, "No, it's the incest stuff. It's too risque." And they're like, "Well, wait a minute. The other guys told us it wasn't risque enough. We can't win here." So they show it to Steven Spielberg, and he loves it, and he wants to make it. But they don't want to be the guys that keep making movies with Steven Spielberg, because that keeps not working out, and it's going to start to look like they're only getting work because they're mates with Steven Spielberg, because he keeps getting the work despite flops. So Zemeckis and Gale end up going separate ways for a little bit and do other projects that are more successful, separate to their relationship with Spielberg. So once they feel like they've established themselves a little bit, they come back to him. And they're like, "Do you still want to do Back to the Future?" And he's like, "Hell yeah, I do." So they set it up between, I think it's Amblin and Touchstone, which ironically ended up being acquired by Disney. So Disney kind of... That's right, isn't it? No, it's Universal.
Right.
It's not. Touchstone did get acquired by
Universal.
Disney, but it's Universal, not Touchstone. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, so it's a Universal film. They set it up between Amblin and Universal, and the movie goes into production. This part of the story is probably one of the most famous elements of the story. This is the Eric Stoltz thing, very quickly. So they wanted to cast Michael J. Fox. They thought he was right for the role. They thought he had the right comedic sensibilities. But at the time, he was on Family Ties. And at the time, one of his co-stars on Family Ties was pregnant and off the show, which meant he was carrying all the episodes and a lot heavier away. His character was way more prominent at the time, and they could not release him.
And he was like the star of this show. He was.
Yes.
The show didn't start out as being, about Alex, but it very quickly morphed into that, given the character and Michael J. Fox's popularity.
Absolutely. So they were not willing to let him go. So they looked elsewhere. Several names cropped up and eventually they ended up casting Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly. Now, the reports vary from 2 to 6 weeks, but the common figure I see is 5 weeks of shooting then commenced. 5 weeks of production in which Eric Stoltz was playing Marty McFly. But apparently the problem was he was he was selling it too insincerely. He was selling the jokes as jokes, and he wasn't reacting to the insane stuff around him. And a lot of the jokes in this movie are Marty or Doc's reaction to the events around them. They're not written as like gag setup, punchline type jokes. There's a couple of those, but it's mostly something extraordinary happens. Marty and Doc pull a face, and that's sells so much of the comedy in this movie, right? And it's not just as simple as that. Obviously, that's really demeaning to their performances. But like, for example, the scene where Lorraine sits on the bed with Marty, and he like backs off the other end of the bed because of how uncomfortable he is. That's all sold with his reactions, right? There's no dialogue that makes that funny. It's all his performance. And apparently Stoltz just wasn't getting that, is what I've understood.
Yeah, apparently Stoltz, according to Tom Wilson, who plays Biff, Stoltz was also very, like, method and, like, would get people to call him Marty. And Tom Wilson says that if he wasn't fired, like, he was about to punch him.
Yeah, so basically, I can give you some background on that. So apparently when they'd done their fight scene in the cafe, Stoltz had continued to beat up Tom Wilson, who, as much as an imposing character as he seems on screen, is actually a big old teddy bear in real life. He's like a really soft, kind, warm guy. And he kept asking Stoltz to go easy, but Stoltz really wanted to sell it, so he kept going hard and actually hitting him. And Tom Wilson's plan was basically in the when they did the car park stuff, where he would get to beat up Marty, he was gonna go for it, but Stoltz got fired before that happened, and he's very grateful. But the other thing that's funny about that is because he insisted everyone called him Marty. When he got fired because it wasn't working, They told Christopher Lloyd that Eric had been fired, and he asked who's Eric because he thought Marty was actually his name.
That's amazing. Tom Wilson also says that he's like, apparently Tom Wilson's like, look, legally they're never going to say this. But Tom Wilson's like, I don't remember reshooting getting punched. Like, I'm pretty sure it's Eric Stoltz's hand that punches me.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. No, and that's been confirmed. If you look at the footage, you can tell the shots they use in that fight. There's definitely some of Eric Stoltz's hand and hair that appear in that shot for sure, absolutely for sure. So that's sort of a summary of the production.
The only other thing is that to do it, which is so impressive. Michael J. Fox.
Oh yeah, sorry. This is the main reason we were going to recap. Sorry, I completely forgot the main part, because once they let go of Eric Stoltz, by that point the other cast member had come back to Family Ties, and they were able to make an agreement for Michael J. Fox to do it. But do you know his schedule? Because I think I've got it written down somewhere. Do you know what he was doing?
Yeah, it's madness. So I can't remember exactly, but wasn't it like, because basically the guy from Family Ties that had been the guy whose show ran Family Ties was a friend of Spielberg's, and Spielberg had come to him asking for Michael first, and the guy from Family Ties was like, look, I'm not trying to be a dick, but it's a high rated show, he's our star, we can't do this. So then when they were getting rid of Stoltz, Spielberg went back to him and was like, look, is there any way? So basically Michael J. Fox had to meet his Family Ties commitments, which meant Family Ties during the day and Back to the Future at night. I don't know if you've now pulled up the exact time.
So he was basically madness. He would be working on Family Ties from about 11 in the morning through till 6 at night. Then he would go to the overnight shoots for Back to the Future from sort of 7 or 8 until 4 a.m, sometimes 6 a.m. Then he would go home, get a couple hours sleep, get out of bed, shower, and then back to Family Ties.
And apparently, when the guy from Family Ties spoke to Michael J. Fox about it, he was like, look, this is going to be a huge commitment. You've got to really be sure. Before you do anything, read the script, sit here now, read it, and let me know what you think. And he passed Michael J. Fox the script, and Michael J. Fox moved the script from one hand to the other, and then went, I love it, I'm in.
Yeah, I think the exact quote is, it's the greatest thing I've ever read, I want to do it, and then he put it back down. Yeah. It's the greatest script I've ever read. I love it. That story I've heard a few times. I think that's really interesting. To give you some interesting stats on the money as well, reshooting the Stoltz scenes actually added $3 million to the film's budget. So it was a $16 million. It was supposed to be about 15, but it blew into about $16 million budget just normally. The Eric Stoltz stuff and reshooting added $3 million to the budget, but the actual film returned $381 million. Now, to give you the conversions on that, so it's a $19 million film in the end, including the Stoltz stuff. 381 million return. Today, that would be about getting 907 million back on a 45 million budget.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like it was well worth it for them. Right. So review of the film, Dan. What did you? For those that don't know, Marty is a teenager in the 80s. He's got a friend, Doc Brown, who's a kind of a mad scientist who has built a time machine out of a DeLorean. Due to spoilers, obviously, by the way, for Back to the Future. So pause. Definitely. Oh, well, I mean, I think it's clear we recommend it. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, it's an incredible film, and if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should see it.
So go watch it and come back. But the Doc gets killed, and Marty ends up being chased away by some people who the Doc conned out of plutonium. Then Marty ends up going back in time to the 50s, where he bumps into and accidentally disrupts his mother and father meeting. So his mother kind of falls for him instead. And there's a week before a lightning bolt, which is going to potentially get him back to the future. And so he needs to fix his parents', relationship, and then travel back to the future, with the help of 1950s Doc Brown. I think my one big thing that I'd kind of really struck me on my last viewing, watching it yesterday, is just and you kind of mentioned it there in terms of how the story came together, the genius of making it about the parents as well is just phenomenal. There was in yesterday's watching, bearing in mind I've seen this film so many times, I was really struck when they kiss, and Lorraine and what's his dad's name?
George McFly.
George and Lorraine kiss, and they're an item, and Marty kind of, because if he doesn't get them together, then potentially he's erased from time. And Marty comes back. When they say goodbye, I'm like, oh yeah, this film isn't just about that. Like, this is also about getting back to the future. Like, in so many films, the act and the task of just getting back to the future would be the main plot. But in this, there's like two really tense, exciting missions to complete. Like, the whole film moves at such a brilliant pace and tone that you can watch it twice within the space of a week and not be bored, be completely, like, the time I watched it yesterday, it was kind of just mainly so that the same as you, so that part 3, so that I didn't go into reviewing the first one with the last film I watched being part 3. I was like, I've got to watch part 1, but I was like, look, I'll do some bits while I watch it. This is about refreshing me, but I absolutely got pulled in and just watched it, even though I'd seen it like a week, 2 weeks before. But the cleverness of the script, the cleverness of that idea of would you be friends with your parents, that idea of could you disrupt your parents' meeting, what impact would that have, is wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it really goes to show you how clever those two were, because the story they tell is that they were trying to make a time travel movie work for ages, and it was only when they had that added ingredient of, would you be friends with your own parents if you went back to see them in high school? How different were they to who they are now, and all that stuff is kind of like, because they're right. The crux of the movie has to be emotional character stuff, and that emotional character stuff has to. And it's what we talk about this so much across all of our podcasts. But when you've got a science fiction concept, it has to help push your character stuff forward. Otherwise, it's just a gimmick. If this was just a time travel movie where a kid who skateboards ends up in the 50s and he's a fish out of water and he has to get home, I don't know if I care enough about that. It might have been a fun movie. I might have gone, oh, there's some good performances in that. There's some good jokes in that. The visual of a time traveling car is cool. Like there certainly would have still been things to enjoy about the movie. But the reason you can come back to it time and time again, and the reason it resonates, is because they found a good character story to merge into their time travel concept. And to have the foresight to know they needed that when they were developing it, and actually to not actively pursue it until they had that hook, shows a real level of insight and brilliance that both Zemeckis and Gale had. They truly understood
Completely.
what they were doing with this. This is not Donnie Darko, where you sometimes wonder if the director actually knew what he was doing. This is intricate, deliberate. They knew exactly the tone they were going for. They knew exactly how to achieve it, and it's, as a result, a fucking brilliant film. So before we go through and break it down bit by bit and point out maybe things that maybe don't work or don't function or particular things we like, it's worth noting that this is an absolute masterpiece on almost every level when you look at it as a whole. There are definitely some mild criticisms you can throw at it, but none of them touch how blindingly brilliant this film is. Like, it is absolutely staggering.
And how well constructed it is. And
exactly.
I think kind of two things to that. One, on behalf of all Donnie Darko fans, how they...
it's a great film, but like, having watched the director's cut, I feel like it was an accident.
We gotta do Donnie Darko at some point, because Donnie Darko is our generation's DVD film. I don't know a person our age that doesn't, for some reason, own Donnie Darko.
At one point I had 3 copies.
Yeah, like, it's madness how that film like really seemed to just basically make our generation wankers about it. It's stunning.
It was particularly huge in the UK, I'm told. So I don't even know if in America it was that big of a deal, but over here
no. Yeah, in the UK it was particularly big. Yeah. So let's get one of those nitpicks now, because it is a nitpick that I've sort of changed my view on when I first heard, and it is, and I'm not saying this is definitely Ed Byrne's opinion. Everything gets exaggerated for comic effect. But Ed Byrne, in I think Different Class, which is a show of his, talks about Back to the Future and makes the point that, like, when Marty gets to that age, surely his parents would recognise him. And I think there's actually, with that particular, it's a science fiction movie, is an argument you could throw to any of these nitpicks. But with that particular one, I was thinking about it on rewatch, and I'm like, well, I see your point, but I think there's 2 kind of counterpoints to it. One,
do you know, just to clarify, have you read Bob Gale's response to that criticism?
No, I haven't actually.
He responded to that criticism this year. You finish what you're explaining, but I'll read you his comments in a moment.
Yeah, maybe they're in line. I don't know, but like, one, I think there's an element of, yes, an incredibly important set of days, but fundamentally, this is for, like, a week. This is a week in the life of these people 20 years ago. So there are people that I wouldn't be able to recognise from, I don't know, courses or, meetings, clients, whatever, from like 2 years ago that I would struggle to recognise or remember if I bumped into them now. So one, there's a passage of time, and we're talking about a time period where there's at no point is there a scene that indicates they've got a photo of him or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So one, it's the time that's gone past, and two, that thing of if someone that you live with or someone in your family like gains or loses weight, you don't really notice because you see them every day. Mm-hmm. He's not going to start looking like that until his teenage years. He's their child. They've seen him every day. And they've seen his face slowly develop and change. They're not going to be able to see anyone but their child Marty, who also, they named him that. So in your head, you just dismiss it as, well, he looks like a Marty because he looks like Marty because he is Marty. You wouldn't. You would only see your child. You wouldn't be going, does he look a bit like that guy? Oh, I mean, to be fair, that was 20 years ago. I can't really remember what that guy looked like. Never mind. Like, what was Bob Gale's response? Almost
exactly that. He said that they only spent a week with this guy, and it wasn't even all of that week. He was basically sort of saying, like, they didn't spend every day with him. They met him a few times over the course of a week, and they probably wouldn't have remembered what he looked like about 20 years later. It doesn't really make a heap of sense that, like, I mean, there are people, if there's someone from my school that I'd met for a week, I'm at sort of early 30s, I wouldn't have been like, there are people from my school, I can't picture their faces right now.
Yeah, mate, there are people I went to school, like, there are people in my class that I wouldn't be sure if I would recognise if I saw them.
100%. So while I understand the potential criticism, it doesn't really work, in my opinion.
No.
No.
So
The other one, I suppose, is the more troubling element that's been pulled up a few times. Particularly, I think, Funny or Die did a series on it, maybe. But the idea that it's actually kind of messed up, that like Biff goes back and changes time and skews the universe into an alternate reality, and it's a big disaster in the second one. But Marty does that in the first one, and it's fine. He literally goes back in time, changes things, so when he goes back into the future, his parents are more happy, successful people at the expense of Biff, who is now this beaten down. Like, there's an element of that's quite messed up. Why were Doc and Marty not worried about the alternate timeline they created that time?
Well, I suppose the argument is that when Biff, it's a slight execution of what Biff would do with that power, which is to fuck up the entire town.
Yeah, Nadia really enjoys the idea that like Biff has the power to shape the reality in any way he wishes, and how he wishes to shape reality is that everyone's living on the streets that are literally on fire. There's like smoke and graffiti and garbage everywhere.
It's a dystopian, awful future, whereas Marty's parents, they're still living in the same place. They still took that picture. They still, like, their personalities are different.
Yeah, but poor Biff's gone from being some sort of middlingly successful businessman to, like, a car wax guy.
Biff's... But very clearly throughout the film, Biff is the villain. Like, they show, like, Biff tries to, like... sexually molest Lorraine. Like, I think they, it is a good point, but I think the movie does a lot to explain why it's made that decision. And Biff is like such a caricature in his villainy.
Yes. Yeah. You almost forget that. Yeah, there's that moment actually struck me more in this rewatch. So for those who don't remember the exact context of the ending sequence for that storyline, the plan is, so Lorraine kind of has a thing for Marty, but Marty wants her to get back with George because otherwise he won't exist in the future. It all makes sense. His plan is to get handsy with Lorraine, which George will then come in, pull him out of the car and say, "You get your hands off her," and punch him, thus getting them back together. That's Marty's plan. It's not a perfect plan by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a teenager. No, and it's the best he could come up with.
I don't think they do. On reflection, the main thing I felt about the incest stuff as well is that I don't think they quite do enough to show that Marty thinks the plan is fucked up.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to the incest stuff in a second. Yeah. I think there's a big discussion to be had about that. But that's the plan, right? So the plan, and then George McFly shows up, and at that point, though, Biff has intervened, beat up Marty, and locked him in a trunk elsewhere, and is in the car, essentially trying to rape Lorraine.
Yeah.
And there's this really quite dark moment, and it's one of the only moments in the whole movie that the tone really does feel like it doesn't quite fit, which is the moment that George opens the door, expecting to find Marty, and going, "Hey," Marty pretending to do something he's not actually gonna, and he opens the door, and it's Biff, and he's like, "Hey, you," and he sort of realizes what's happened, and Lorraine's like, help me, and she's like clearly in this state of distress. It's a brilliant performance from Lea Thompson. She sells it really well, but it is, in what is otherwise a family movie, the one point I think they put their toe over the line. It's look,
yeah, definitely.
It creates a very good villain in Biff, and certainly, in the next movie they continue that with making him sort of a murderer and a bunch of other stuff too. And it certainly makes you feel way less sorry for him in the context of the final sequence. But as a mild criticism, and again, blinding, brilliant movie. It's incredible on every level, but rewatching it, that moment felt slightly too dark, and I think maybe how they should have done it would have been that he opens the door, but it's not long after Biff's got in, so it's not gotten as far as panicked cries for help from Lorraine, but it's about to, and then he punches him, because otherwise it's just a little too dark. Just toe over the line, too dark for me.
Yeah, do you think that's because I don't know if it would have gone as over the line now. Do you think that's a of its time thing? Like, I've not seen, like, for example, 16 Candles, but same sort of era, and apparently, like, when you look at that now in a modern sensibility, 16 Candles is fucked up. Like, and
Yes.
obviously I haven't seen 16 Candles, so I literally can't compare the two. But that sense of that is one element that feels very of its time. The fact that they felt they could cross into that territory, so, in a family film, for example.
Yeah, it very well could be. I think that we're a little bit more sensitive to that stuff these days.
Quite rightly.
Yeah. 100% correctly, and as a result, I think the thing is they clearly do just keep it on the line anyway. Like, well, it's so close. It's like it's just toe over. It's not fully over it, but it's so close. Yeah, and I feel like in a modern day, that's a change they may make.
It's also built. It's an example of the script layering things and building them up, either grand, on a grand scale, on a minor scale, on a kind of a background things you notice scale, but like they have him kind of being way over the line with her in the canteen earlier in that film, and they really did that is an element that they also really develop in the sequel as well, in part 2, where Biff is shouting at her, "You're the one I'm meant to be with." This notion that he's obsessed with specifically Lorraine.
I had completely forgotten about that scene until I rewatched it this last 2 weeks. Like, and that scene in the second one really struck me. We'll come back to it, but holy hell, that really did hit me, because it was just like this idea that Lorraine wasn't just like, the hot girl at school he was like, following around because he's like one of the lads, lads, I'm gonna, harass this girl, hilarious. He actually like genuinely believed they were like meant to be together and that he was gonna.
But I think it's partly a power thing. She was the one that refused. She was the one that said no, and it's none of that justifies the scene going over the line, but they did. It's not random. Whether now it feels like that scene was over the line or not, it's very much embedded into these three films. So, Incest, Dan, what are your thoughts on that? That side of things.
They haven't actually changed from what I think I said a couple of months ago on this podcast, thankfully, in rewatching it. I feel like the movie does enough in Marty's reactions. Weirdly, I don't think the script does enough. I think on paper,
no,
it's weirdly too incesty, this movie. But, thankfully, Michael J. Fox and Lea Thompson do such a good job, and even Christopher Lloyd do such a good job whenever this subject comes up, and because that is the premise of the movie, that she falls in love with Marty instead of George, therefore potentially erasing him, or she has a crush on is maybe a more accurate term. The idea, when it comes up, the characters' reactions are so good at establishing that it's messed up and insane that this is the situation they've gotten themselves into. Like Marty's delivery when he finally says to Doc, "You mean you think she's got the hots for me?" Like his face, his voice, like it's like, oh my god, like you totally believe that he's both baffled and grossed out. And the funny thing is, there's like a moment of realization there, and that's after the scene she squeezed his knee under the table. So like,
his reaction in that scene is really good as well.
Yeah, he like jumps up and awkwardly leaves. I think the movie basically, on paper, doesn't do enough, but I think in the performances they basically do enough to make it acknowledge that it's horrendously wrong. But the reason they get away with it is obviously she doesn't know, and then the final nail in that is on the page, which is that when she finally leans in and kisses Marty, she like stops almost instantly, pulls back.
Lea Thompson's performance in that moment is a huge part of it. Yes. Like the instant switch, her reaction, all of it is played. I didn't realise until watching it, with
that eye, with that eye
specifically.
Yeah,
I didn't realise how important Lea Thompson's performance is to selling it as well.
Yeah. So basically, for those who don't remember, she pulls back and says, it's wrong. It's like kissing my brother, which also does raise the question: you do a lot of kissing with your brother, like, like you you shouldn't know what that feels like either. But
the notion as well of the
idea of being that she somehow just instinctively knows that it's wrong and that it shouldn't happen, and there's a line being crossed that she can't put a finger on what it is, but it's there, is brilliant and really does work, I think. That's not to say it doesn't come close to crossing the line, but it definitely doesn't, in my opinion.
They nicely embed the Florence Nightingale effect as well, the notion that it's not even necessarily Marty's personality or looks that she's drawn to.
No.
Although there's some stuff about being drawn to partners and your family that will come up when we discuss part 3. But like, it's kind of, Doc says, it's a scientific thing as well. It's not even necessarily you, although there's some stuff later where he does some awesome stuff in the chase and stuff. I think the other thing about,
but that's reinforcing an infatuation, though, isn't it? She barely knows him. She spent less than an hour with him total, like across all of this, and it's sort of like it's just he's this sort of weird enigma that's doing things differently. He's kicking ass. He's taking names. He's skateboarding around the place. It's really interesting the way they do it, because at no point do they give you the impression she's falling in love with Marty. You get the impression that he's such a cool kid in the context of the 1950s, because he's doing stuff differently, because he's got an 80s sensibility to him. So, he's just doing what he wants, like he's fighting back and all that stuff that makes him seem really cool in the 50s. So again, they're selling it as an infatuation rather than love.
I think it would be helped and squashed further by seeing the scene where we don't ever see the scene where he comes up with that plan, to be all handsy and get his dad to punch him and all of that stuff. And I think maybe a scene that either reinstates Marty's doing this because she has spent so long saying she wasn't that kind of girl and being against Jennifer and saying Jennifer's too keen, that Marty, despite the knee squeezing, which potentially you'd need to get rid of as well to really help this, Marty can't see a world where his mum is anything other than that. So this plan is the only thing he can think of because of that.
That guarantees it. Go on.
But also a scene where we never see him really, even in the scene where George is hanging up the washing and he tells him that plan, we don't quite linger on Marty's face of disgust long enough, or when he comes up with the plan, see that he's grossed out by the plan. We see it in the car. In the car, it's played very well when he's nervously drinking and whatever, and can't bring himself to do it. And actually, again, it's quite clever that she kisses him. He can never bring himself to do it. But maybe something where we visibly see that this is the only plan, but not one he's happy with.
There might be a simpler solution. Which is, in that washing line scene, George says, "No, we can't do that. That's I respect her too much to even try this plan." And Marty says, "Look, it's not going to get that far, is it? I know her really well. The second I park that car and suggest that we stay in it, you're going to be the hero." Because that makes it sound like Marty's plan has an end point way before anything handsy. Whereas, and then in the end of the movie, you'd feel like it's sort of like you'd go, "Oh no, he's gotten sucked into this now because she's not behaving as he expected her to."
Yeah, which is there, but it's not there.
I'm saying, if you have George raise that question, you make George even more of a hero, because he's like, "No, no, I'm not going to let you even pretend to be handsy with her. Like, no." And then Marty, it would have established that in Marty's head, it was never going to get even that far.
Yeah.
That solves both problems at once. It's sort of like, so maybe that would have been the answer. Would have been reaffirmed it.
What was sort of the thing that, even if it's only a little thing, that really struck you on this viewing? One thing I loved is that, and again, the performances in this are across the board stunning.
Yes.
And one thing I'd never appreciated was actually how, although there are moments that are obviously written and played very overtly and very, caricaturish, I think was the word I used earlier, but there's also a lot of nuance and subtlety in Tom Wilson's performance as Biff. In particular, one thing that really struck me on the last viewing was older Biff is slightly afraid of and slightly less confident around Marty, like at the start of the film, and you feel like that's because Marty is, at least outwardly, more confident than his dad and more, a bit bolder and a bit brasher, and there's just this, Biff doesn't quite know how to be around him because he knows he can't get away with treating Marty how he treats his dad.
It's the pause really... before he calls him a butthead. He's giving George shit. Marty's there, but he hasn't spotted him yet. He turns to leave. He comes face to face with Marty, and there's this really interesting hesitation that he puts into the performance. Because I bet you on the page that said he turns around, sees Marty, he's like, "What are you looking at, butthead?" and walks out the room. I guarantee you that's what was on the page. And Wilson added this layer of, God, I can push George around, but I'm not so sure about this kid.
And it just makes the ending, it just helps the ending make sense, because you get that feeling that if George were to have that confidence, then Biff would absolutely succumb. And it's this really subtle acting choice from Tom Wilson that really helps the movie.
There's a really interesting...
And I've never kind of spotted that before.
There's a really, in terms of the acting, like in general, like they all add so much to it. Like I do think as well, like a lot of this is in the casting. Like this is a great movie and probably would have been a great movie regardless of this cast. But I do think that they really push it over the line. They are what sell this in the end. Like more than many of the films we've spoken about in this. In fact, looking back, I don't think there's another film in Rewind reviews we've done that this is true for. You switch out this cast, this movie loses a lot of its luster. It's still a great film, but I'd say they are more integral to this project, the cast, than pretty much any other movie we've watched.
Yeah, because I can't, there is, Groundhog Day wouldn't be the same without Bill Murray. But there's, in this, like... You future movies also show in the Back to the Future series that it isn't the same, without Crispin Glover. The idea of it without Lea Thompson, Tom Wilson, Christopher Lloyd, they're all brilliant performances. Even, I'm sure she's a wonderful person, she's a good actress, it's nothing against her, but even the Jennifer switch is really noticeable, and that character's not even in there in this movie for that much screen time. Yeah,
Elizabeth Shue takes on the role in the second and third movies, and I like Elizabeth Shue. She's a good show. Particularly, obviously, remember her from the Karate Kid films. For me, though, the original actress that played Jennifer had a much more subtle and believable performance. She did bring a real... Yeah, I think it's just subtlety to it. I think Elizabeth Shue had more of a comedic approach, and I think for... Claudia Wells, who's the original Jennifer, she's in a movie of big characters and big reactions and big comedy. She's almost this nice anchor point where she feels weirdly grounded.
Yeah, and that's so important when you completely understand why in with not many scenes between the two of them, you understand why Marty's desperate to get back. You understand the importance of her and that relationship. And there's not a lot on the page or, screen time wise to sell that. So the fact that they do sell it is fantastic. And what were kind of some of your other spots or headline thoughts?
Well, just to finish that point as well, I think with Elizabeth Shue, she brought up the comedy and the reactions to the other cast's level. And that's a choice, and a very conscious choice. She was matching their tone. But I think, for me, and this is personal preference, that's not a choice I would have made. That's not the choice. Having watched the movies recently, I feel like that's not a choice that I would have made, or it's not a choice that maybe the director should have encouraged. I would have maybe had her bring it down a little in that second movie and the third one as well, just so she's not quite as reactive. Because that's kind of what sold that Jennifer character for me.
Yeah, like you say, there are much zanier, wilder situations reacting to.
Absolutely, and it's really for the directors to manage that. Like, I can't criticize Elizabeth Shue for wanting to put her own stamp on it and take her own approach. Absolutely not a criticism there, but the directors should have maybe observed that. But it's worth noting as well that best in a bad situation. Obviously, the reason Claudia Wells didn't come back is because her mother was very sadly diagnosed with cancer, and she quit acting altogether to look after her mother. So there's a lot of where did Claudia Wells go? But in reality, she was, she did the right thing.
Yeah, you've
got
to respect that.
So absolutely. So anyway, other stuff that I thought was worth noting. I see what surprised me the most, and this is again on the subject of the acting. Actually, on paper, Doc and Marty don't share any conversation that isn't expository.
Yeah.
How you sell their friendship in a script that doesn't sell their friendship until one scene towards the end where Doc says, Marty, I've had a good time spending, with you the last few days. There's that one line. Where he's like, I'm going to miss you, But other than that, the movie doesn't, on paper, do a lot to make you believe these two are friends. But again, the performances absolutely sell that. The way they talk and interact, it's just so clear they get on.
Yeah,
and it makes
brilliant.
sense. Because, again, on paper, I'd be going, why is this scientist hanging out with this kid? I don't understand this friendship. I don't understand how this grew. I don't understand how they get on so well. It doesn't really fit. But when those two actors take on that role, wow. I mean, you believe it instantly.
The fact that you never ask that until Rick and Morty is amazing. The fact that no one ever really went, that's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Until Rick and Morty is essentially based on the premise of,
yes,
think how weird this is. You don't spot it, and the only way you do that is with the performances. Because, like you say, it's sure as hell not in the script.
Yeah, there's two lines that suggest they're friends, and they do maybe a better job in the subsequent movies, but just in this first one, in part one, there's nothing. There's so little.
No, it's amazing.
Other than Marty's determination to try and save Doc, I guess. Which I guess is what they thought would have pushed it over the line, but it really did require.
Yeah, but that makes you believe the friendship. But the fact that you don't at any point go, why does this friendship exist? Where does it come from? What's the story here? Which is something they kind of never answer.
Yeah,
it's just phenomenal and solely down to the performances, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of other stuff, I noticed, I didn't make, you know what? I'll be honest with you, Chris. Unlike any other time we've done this, I don't have deep notes because I couldn't do it. I just kept getting pulled in, and actually, as a compliment for the film, when Nadia and I were watching it the first time, whatever it was, half a week ago, whatever, we were both so gripped by the ending. That sequence where Marty's in the car and it won't start, and Doc's on the clock tower roof trying to get the thing plugged in. Nadia was like, "Oh, good!" As if it might not happen this time.
Yes.
Which, I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. Even in a world where I haven't seen the movie before, I know they're gonna succeed. It's a family movie.
Yeah.
What movie does the hero not win? It's, you know what I mean? It's, of course, But there's something about the construction of this movie, and I tell you what, I'll never be able to. I'm telling you right now, I'll never know the answer to this question. But something about the way this movie is put together is magical and invests you in their success. And they replicate that in the second movie with the Almanac. Because again, there's a real tension to will he get it, and it doesn't make any sense. It defies all logic because of course he's gonna get the car working again. Of course Doc's gonna get the thing plugged in, and the lightning's gonna hit, and the car's gonna get him home. That's it's the happy ending a movie like this absolutely deserves, and he's definitely going to get. But when he tugs on that wire and it unplugs at the bottom, whew, the tension. How does that work, Chris? Do you know? Because I honestly, that is magic. That's wizardry as far as I'm concerned. I can't point to anything at all that and go, oh, it's because they shot it in this way or because they did it in this way that makes me. I don't get it. I don't know how it works.
I think it's so beautifully constructed in every element, in the location, even the effects. There's one, the hand fading is sort of, it has aged a bit, but in general, even the makeup work is good.
The makeup work's incredible.
On the older characters, like, it's really strong. Like, I love the writing around that with Doc in the second one, but we'll come to that. But like, I just think the whole thing is pieced together beautifully. Like, it is such a perfect execution. And like, I love, it's even the little things that you don't notice, like the fact that, so not this last viewing, but the viewing before that, I'm like, this is my favourite film. Like, they say you always notice something new when you watch this film. I ain't gonna notice anything new. The fact that it goes from 2 pine mill to 1 pine mill because Marty knocks down a pine tree, like all of that stuff. Come at me, bro. Like, I'm not gonna notice anything new. I assume you mean
mall, not mill.
Mall, yeah, whatever. Fucking first, like, nearly the first frame, I'd never noticed that there was a still from whatever movie it is that foreshadows Doc hanging off of the clock.
Yes.
Like, just straight away there in, like, the first 5 or 10 seconds of the movie. And I was like, fucking hell. All right, fine. You got me.
I'm sorry if anyone can hear
perfect.
A vehicle revving up on my end. Someone very close to my home has just decided to, like, obnoxiously rev up a motorcycle, it sounds like. So I'm sorry if that was heard by the audience. I don't think it will have been necessarily, but it's pretty loud, so maybe.
Yeah. So what we're saying, Dan, is a surprising revelation. Back to the Future's good.
Yeah, and the structure was the other thing I noticed as well, because you know what shouldn't work, Chris? About 20 minutes before the time machine shows up, of just layering in...
It's longer.
Layering in things.
It's half an hour, because I think I watched this... The last time I watched it was on Prime, with sort of the time code kept coming up because of the way I was watching
the actual...
it. Huh?
18 minutes.
No, but it's half an hour until he goes back in time.
Right, yes, yeah. But I mean, once the time machine shows up, you've got a hook then. That's when you're like, oh, there's a time machine. You're intrigued and you're pulled in. But the 18 minutes that precedes the time machine rolling out of that truck is just laying in things to pay off later. It's honestly, it's 18 minutes of exposition.
Yeah.
Because, these are his parents. Meet them now. So you keep that in mind. That's who they are. His mum, a bit like that. This is what Hill Valley looks like in the present day. Hope you're noticing all the different shops because they're going to change when we go back. Like, this is Strickland. He's the principal. Make note. It's just a movie. It's it's the first 18 minutes of the movie are just like, remember that. It's all coming back. And like, that shouldn't be entertaining. That shouldn't work at all. I should be bored out of my mind until minute 20.
Again, 30, 35, he goes back in time.
Yeah.
I think it's the fact that they really squeeze out comedy and engaging and warm performances in every bit, and it juggles such. This isn't. I'll try and think of an example in a sec of the first 18 minutes, but like one thing I really noticed was the juggling of different kinds of reactions when the model car is set on fire and goes into the bin and lights it aflame. Christopher Lloyd makes this really over the top noise, like. And it's just amusing, like things like, but that's a completely different tone of comedy to Michael J. Fox going, listen, daddy-o, like it's got all these different types of comedy. I think for the first 18 minutes, again, it's Crispin Glover being so beautifully weird when watching the TV.
They do such a good job to sell Lorraine's life. That's something I noticed this time around that I didn't notice before, was how sad Lorraine's life is in the initial version of the future before Marty adjusts things. She's just like the regret she sells in like just 2 minutes. Like, she's telling this wistful story of falling in love with this man, and then she looks up and he's like, watching this shitty old sitcom, like, because he's completely oblivious. And she sort of, you don't believe for a moment she doesn't love him, but you do think she wishes maybe like their lives were different. And it's so beautifully sold. Again, Lea Thompson just absolutely, the whole cast, but Lea Thompson has to be in every conversation about how good the cast in this movie is, because she sells so much of this. And particularly in that moment, though, in old woman makeup, doing the voice, she's made it all croaky. Like, it's so good. It's amazing.
The thematic choices as well, of the parallels of the fear of rejection, and being shy and being worried what people will think between Marty and his dad and stuff. And I'd never noticed until rewatching the whole trilogy and then rewatching the first one, how that switch in 2 and 3 to it being more about Marty not being called a chicken. Although what's interesting about that is it kind of, they don't do this, and we'll talk more about it next week maybe, they don't do this, but you could kind of sell that on the basis of this movie. So you could go, well, Marty saw what being afraid did to his dad and the change in his life as a result of no longer being afraid. So Marty's going over the top and doing all he can to show that he's not afraid of anything and that he's not a chicken. I think the character nuance and the subtlety in this first film of it being more about rejection and stuff is better, is stronger. It's just that perfect construction.
Yeah, so the structure of this film is kind of magical as well, because there's a lot of this movie that you just go, this shouldn't work, but somehow the movie magic it does. Like 18 minutes of exposition shouldn't function, does. A Doc and Marty's relationship that's probably not on the page, but there it is, and it's beautiful.
But it's also so cool, and it's so bright and fun and 80s, and it's little character choices as well. Like the decision, okay, Marty's not just gonna skate home. Marty's thing is going to be that he skates by grabbing hold of cars, even if it's a police car, doesn't matter. He's still happy to hold on to it and get pushed, get pulled around.
And he's such a man about town. Like, he waves at the girls in the doing the aerobics class, and they wave back. Yeah.
What that says about him being cool and brave, but also if you look at it a bit further, like when describing it, then he's getting pulled around. He's not putting in the work himself. Like, it's so
because Marty's arc in this movie has actually been a little bit erased, because the arc was about him not pursuing what he wants to do with his music because he's afraid of rejection. He goes back into the past and discovered his dad wasn't going for the things he wanted to because he was afraid of rejection. And there's this thing that's set up in the opening 18 minutes of the movie that was actually supposed to be paid off in the end, but didn't make it in the cut or in the script, whatever, to do with Marty. So did you notice on the rewatch, because me and Nadia did, the very jump cut from Marty at the table with his family to Marty unconscious on his bed in his clothes. Doc rings him and is like, "You're on your way, right? Like, you're nearly." That's quite an aggressive cut, and the reason there is because apparently there was a scene in between those two of Marty with his cassette tape that Jennifer mentioned, whether he wanted to send it off to the company or not, whether he wanted to send it off to the record labels, or whether he was too scared to send it off because he couldn't take that kind of rejection. And then the ending of the movie, when he comes downstairs and he's like, "What's this?" and they're like, "Breakfast." He's supposed to be holding the tape. Like, he's taking it and it's in a sealed envelope, and he's supposed to be posting it. Now, that didn't end up making it into the movie, but it probably should have, right?
Yeah, you get a nice juxtaposition between how bad the audition on that stage goes and then how kick-ass Johnny Be Good, which is another incredible sequence, is. So that's nice, but I think that what got taken out would have been really good for character.
Yeah.
I agree. And it kind of then, because also from Marty's context, all of this shit like happens at once. Like these three films all happen one after the other.
Honestly, we'll talk about that because there's a point in the second movie that I got really irrationally angry when he goes, God, it feels like I was here yesterday. And I was like, you were. You literally and figuratively were. Another version of you was there yesterday, but also you were literally there yesterday, Marty, because this has all happened over the space of about 2 days at this point. Like,
yeah,
Jesus. Anyway, it's an amazing film. Actually, we should talk a little bit about that. What do you think about the idea of like Marty going back in time and inventing skateboards and inventing music, or that kind of music? Sorry, I should say. Like,
I thought about that more because there's different, and this is again, it's especially applicable with the third movie in particular. Mm-hmm. But there's loads of different ways to interpret like the time travel element of it, because you could interpret, well, the notion of the end is that he the Chuck Berry thing and the Johnny Be Good inspired Chuck Berry and stuff, but also there's the skateboard stuff, but even pre that, I think on an early watch as a kid, I kind of went, did Marty inspire him to become the mayor? Like, because he literally puts that thought in his head. But obviously there's an element of that doesn't quite make sense because that's a version of time. He was mayor in a version of time before Marty changed time.
Yes, because this movie goes on the alternate realities, like the many worlds version of time travel, where you can create an alternate an alternate reality by making changes. And the movie makes very clear. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but when the clock tower is shown as being broken in the opening of the movie, the rock at the front isn't crumbled. The sort of not skirting, but like that sort of like ledge that Doc breaks isn't broken. But when he goes back to Hill Valley, having changed time, the first hint that he's changed time is that because Doc was up there that night now, that rock is now crumbled.
Yeah. So under that logic, certainly skateboards, he didn't encourage that guy to become the mayor. He didn't invent skateboards because they were all present in a version
they
of time
ended up that
before
way
he
anyway.
Changed it. Chuck Berry, he never explicitly... Well, no, he knows Johnny Be Good, so the fact that he knows Johnny Be Good means he didn't do it. So I kind of view it as, certainly with the Chuck Berry thing and with the mayor thing, he got there first. That guy was always going to... And they sell it, like, whether they looked at it this deeply or not, who knows. But they sell it in the mayor's attitude, because you look at that guy and go, regardless of whether Marty said you should be mayor, he would have always come to this conclusion because he's that kind of guy. You know what I mean? Chuck Berry would have always come up with Johnny Be Good because he's that kind of guy. Marty maybe spurred these things on a bit, but I think,
or maybe earlier,
especially the pine trees and the crumbling clock face. So as I said earlier, initially it's 2 Pine Mall, and then because Marty knocks down one of the pine trees, it's
when
1
it's like
Pine
a sapling.
Mall.
Yeah. No, it's called like, I think it's called Lone Pine Mall.
No, that's it, Lone Pine Mall.
Yeah.
So the very fact that they layered those things in, right. I think the movie, especially this movie, things get a little blurry later on, where there's different interpretations, has such a clear stance on time travel in the world. So I think those things are just like the Chuck Berry thing, especially, is just a great gag. Like, the Ronald Reagan stuff is just playing with it. But
the interesting thing about that gag, though, is obviously, the idea, like some people have said, Back to the Future, it's weirdly racist that like a white guy goes back in time to give the black man music. Like, it's music famously invented by a black artist, and it was very influential. The idea that like this movie sort of like is accidentally racist because it sort of makes it invented by a white guy, which I agree with you. My interpretation of it is he doesn't invent. Maybe he thinks of it earlier with that inspiration, but it doesn't ultimately change it because it has to have existed for Marty to go back with it. But it's funny to think of the movie in that way.
Yeah, in order to by their rules, for Marty to know Johnny Be Good, then Johnny Be Good exists in a world before Marty changed time. So therefore he didn't,
The other thing I will say, I mean, can Michael J. Fox just not sing? It was noticeable when I was a kid, and it's noticeable now that it's not him singing, and it really does hamper that scene.
Not as noticeable, though, as the fact that, again, this is a sequel thing, is the fact that Marty ages quite significantly between the first movie and the second.
How long was between them? I thought that. I didn't look it up, but I wanted to. I guess because they shot them back to back that there was quite a gap, but holy hell.
Yeah, I think there's something like 4 years or something, but I never really noticed it as a kid. I mean, as a kid, I barely noticed that Jennifer changed. It's funny. Let me just
how do you think that if this was just one movie, how do you feel about the ending?
I don't. The thing is, we'd be sat here now going, "God, if only wouldn't you have loved to have seen a sequel?"
Yeah, I mean, so for those who don't remember that ending, we should clarify that it's all happy. Marty's come back to reality. It's been changed for the better for him. His parents are happier people. The family are a little bit better off. Biff isn't bullying his dad anymore. His dad's got all this confidence. And by the way, holy hell, actually, very quickly, how good is Crispin Glover's performance as, like, happy, confident George McFly?
Yeah. Oh, Crispin Glover.
Incredible is that. That is... Because a lot of the movie, I'm going, Crispin Glover is just being Crispin Glover. Like, look, it's a good performance of George McFly. He's all weird, and he says things in a weird way, and his body language is all over the place, and it's... And you could go, that's a genius actor, like... making those choices, or you could go, well, Crispin Glover's just a bit weird and maybe that's just carried over. The way you know it's a genius performance and not just Crispin Glover being Crispin Glover is how easily he turns on happy, confident, like, cool,
but also in a way that you believe it's the same person.
Yeah, it's incredible. That is one of my favorite performances of the whole movie, is that like 2 minutes that adult George McFly is on screen in that movie.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it next week. I think the second film does more than I realised as a kid miss Crispin Glover.
Yes.
There were 4 years between the two. So 85 was Back to the Future, 89 was Back to the Future Part 2. So I thought it was 4. Yeah. I'd just be going, well, it's, you know what, if they never made...
I think if they... Sorry, we didn't actually explain what the ending was, did we? Sorry. Doc comes back. I got completely distracted because I remember the Crispin Glover thing and I really want to make that point. Sorry. So Doc comes back out of nowhere and it's just like, Marty, we gotta go to the future. We need to help you. He's like, what do we turn out assholes? And Doc's like, no, we gotta help your kids. And then there's the whole flying DeLorean thing and the whole roads. Well, we don't need roads, and they fly off to their next adventure. It was the original intent of that ending.
Yeah, and it was put in, like, because Bob and Robert Zemeckis, or Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis always said that if they could go back in time, the fact that they put Jennifer in the car shows they weren't thinking about it seriously. If you cut the movie, if it's one movie and it ends on Marty and Jennifer lovingly staring at the car, then it's utter perfection. If they did that ending, but then didn't go on to make part 2 and 3, then we're sat here discussing it the way we were discussing The Italian Job. Do you know what I mean? It's the ultimate. No,
I don't. What the hell? I don't think it's the same, because the Italian Job didn't. The premise of the movie. The premise that'd be like this movie ending before Marty drives the DeLorean to the lightning.
Yeah, or ending on that point and you not knowing whether he did then get back. Yeah,
that's the difference. Like, the Italian Job was offensively cliffhangery, like, literally, and because it was the plot of the movie. This was and now we're on to our next adventure. So you can imagine Doc and Marty then went on many adventures together. Like, that's
imagine watching that as a kid. Imagining it would not have been good enough.
No, I agree with you, but I do still think it works with that ending, regardless of a sequel existing or not. I'm glad the sequels got made. Don't get me wrong. This is the timeline and where the sequels happened. I'm happy I live in it. But in a world where those sequels don't ever materialize for whatever reason, I still think this is an amazing movie, and that ending isn't a cock tease like the frustrating like the Italian Job one is.
Yeah, comparing it to the two is perhaps it would be like us not getting a third Jumanji movie after the ending of Jumanji: The Next Level. You know, yes. Matt. Dan, just really
Yep.
Really want that ending. I want that third Jumanji movie. I actually do want that third Jumanji movie, but
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed the second one well enough. It's
or
good.
Fourth one. Or fifth, technically. Apparently, because there's that weird
Zathura.
space movie that comes, between Jumanji and Welcome to the Jungle. Anyway, trib for Back to the Future, Dan. What have we got?
So, the reason you'll never see a sequel is because due to the way this film was put together to go into production, the rights to the film and its sequels are actually owned directly, not by a company, but by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale personally. So, in a 2015 interview, Zemeckis maintained that no reboot or remake of the franchise would ever be authorized during their lifetime. So, basically, Hollywood, if you want to remake Back to the Future, you need to go assassinate Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, because otherwise, it ain't happening, and I'm relieved. We should talk about that, actually. I mean, Hollywood will get to it. When those two have passed on, sadly, Hollywood will get to it. Do you fear that time, or do you think it'll be far enough in the future that it'll be removed enough that it won't matter?
You can't. Unfortunately, it's not. So I don't want it to happen. I agree with Robert Zemeckis, and I mean every time I'm going to say it differently. And Bob Gale. I don't want it to happen. I don't think it should happen. But I can't sit here and go, it would categorically definitely be awful because of Watchmen, because of Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle, which, whether you enjoyed it or not, made a shitload of money.
And I think was generally reasonably well received. Even the people who just thought it was okay. Like, it didn't cause the uproar that, like, the Ghostbusters from 2016 did. Like,
exactly.
Those kind of reboots have been done successfully.
Yeah,
there are examples of it working.
There are examples of both, especially something like Watchmen, which fundamentally is a sequel set decades later, which this could be. I don't personally want it. Would I categorically say it will definitely be awful? No, because, with the right script and execution, it might not be.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. I think I'd be a bit nervous about a new cast, because, again, the cast really sell all of this. But there are plenty of very talented actors out there that I would like to see tackle this. I fear there's two versions of this movie, isn't there? Though there's two versions of a Back to the Future sort of reboot that exist. One is actually just a complete remake of the original from scratch. So a kid knows a scientist, invents a time machine out of an old car. And he's like, "What is that?" And he's like, "It's a DeLorean. It's a car from the '80s. Don't worry about it." And they have the same adventure. Or there's the version that I feel like could happen, which is an old Marty with his kids, and an older Doc, and the DeLorean is somehow in a version of it from all their time traveliness is in a garage somewhere covered in dust. And it somehow gets pulled up, and there's another adventure based on that.
Yeah, and one big challenge that any version for me has is, one, do you set it, say you do that version. Is it, presumably, to make that work, it has to either be in the future from Back to the Future Part 2, or they have to give an in-movie reason why the future looks like our future, not the future that we'd seen already for 2015 in Back to the Future Part 2. So there's that complication.
Oh, yeah.
The straight-out remake seems cleaner to avoid any of that, but the problem with remaking it and still setting it... If you set it in the 80s and do the 50s, then you just...
You'd set it now and you'd do the 80s, wouldn't you?
But the problem with that for me is what makes Back to the Future work is the fish out of water sensation of Marty going back in time to the 50s. Now, there would be that to a degree in someone now going back to the 80s, but nowhere near as much because of the rise of nostalgia culture. Stranger Things, this movie itself, like, there's much pop culture
Chris, that
from
nostalgia
the 80s.
Culture is for us 30-year-olds. We're talking about a teenager from today getting thrown back into the 80s. Imagine that. Suddenly he's not got access to phones or, or social media. Like,
fuck me, the idea of a Back to the Future with a kid complaining that he can't fucking text or WhatsApp.
Well, no, but the idea that, but think about that. Like, he goes back, he's stopped his parents from getting together, and he's like, no problem, just pull up a social... Like there's an element of you could definitely show that like the you could show the negatives of social media and not social media, but like that's just some of the stuff kids rely on these days by taking them out of it. You know, you make jokes about it, like, you know, that whole thing of, oh, you do it with your hands, that's lame. You know, in the second one with that thing, you know, he could really realize how much tougher kids had it maybe without access to that stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, I can't sit here and categorically say it would be bad, but I can't personally see.
No, I don't want it to happen either. As far as I'm concerned, they stay away from it. Like I'm happy if they do decide to do it. It'll really depend on who they give it to. So let's right now, fingers crossed that Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis both live till about the age of 200.
And the trouble with that though is, and like we got to get to Triv and not love Back to the Future for 2 hours, but the problem with anything now with it depends who they give it to is there is now a team that is impossible to argue couldn't handle it, because if Lord and Miller can make the Lego movie work.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few.
You just go, well, Lord and Miller.
Lord and Miller, or even like the Russo brothers.
Yeah.
Because they've had a real mix of comedy and special effects. They know how to make things funny, but they also know how to tell a good story with character and heart. Yeah. They've also done time travel. There's a few creative teams you'd go, they could do it. You're right, my pick would be Lord and Miller. But I could absolutely see a few different people taking that on and making a movie I'd watch, for sure.
Because Lord and Miller, I think, would find a way to handle the do you do their 2015 or do you do the actual 2015? Because if they can make the complexities of Into the Spider-Verse work,
exactly,
then they can make the complexities of that work.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. They'd be a good pick. So to get to the trip. So apparently, when Ronald Reagan watched this movie, he enjoyed being referenced so much that he had the projectionist stop and replay the scene. And then he very intentionally, in his 1986 State of the Union address, referenced Back to the Future and said, "Where we're going, we don't need roads." I love that so much. That's a great joke, by the way. So for those who don't know, Ronald Reagan was genuinely like an actor in the 50s who became president in the 80s. And the joke is when Marty goes back in time, Doc's like, "Oh, okay, future boy, who's president in 1985?" He's like, Ronald Reagan's like, "The actor." Like that's the gag. But it's really well done. Like his performance is very good on that. His disbelief.
I also really liked. Who the hell is John F. Kennedy?
Yeah. I also like, Ronald Reagan's the president, is he? Who's the Secretary of State? Jerry Lewis? It's so good. So good. It's a really funny movie. In 2010, during a cast reunion, Michael J. Fox said that strangers still call him McFly constantly. He says the most memorable instance of this is when he was in a remote jungle in a South Asian country. Did he say where that was? Oh, he's in Bhutan, located between China and India, in the Himalayas, and a group of Buddhist monks who passed him looked at him and then started yelling, "McFly! McFly!" It's just amazing. Apparently, Biff's cat, I think they called him Bill then. Biff's catchphrase, "Make like a tree and get out of here," and Butthead were both completely improvised by Tom Wilson.
Oh, the "make like a tree" thing is genius, because again, it's just a choice that says so much about that character.
Yeah. So apparently he improvised that. That's pretty good. This is a really good one. So remember last week I said the greatest way of dodging a studio note of all time on Groundhog Day was when they got the note to write the stupid explain why he's in a loop scene, and Harold Ramis was just like, "Just write it. We won't film it. Just write it though. That'll keep the studio happy. We'll just not shoot it, and then by the time we're editing the movie, they're not going to know the difference. Like, it'll be too late to do anything about it." So that was a great way to handle a studio note. Just pretend you're doing what they want. There's an even better way, it turns out. So, Universal Pictures head Sid Sheinberg, can't quite pronounce that, but that guy, we'll call him Sid, did not like the title Back to the Future and insisted that nobody would see a movie with future in the title. In a memo to Robert Zemeckis, he said the title should be changed to Spaceman from Pluto, tying in with the Marty as alien jokes that were playing in the film. He also suggested further changes like replacing the I'm Darth Vader from Planet Vulcan line with I'm a spaceman from Pluto to make that title work. He was persuaded not to do this when Spielberg sent him a note back which thanked him for sending such a wonderful joke memo and that everyone had gotten a kick out of it. So Scheinberg, too proud to admit that he'd been serious, let them keep the title.
That is stunning. That is amazing.
I love that story so much. I love everything about
phenomenal.
that. Phenomenal. Oh, so good. Spielberg's response is fucking perfect.
That is fantastic.
I love that story. Yeah, it's a good one. So we're playing a one-upmanship now. Can we find a film with an even better studio note story than that? I'm not sure we can, but there you go. We've already talked about the inspiration for the film, so I'll skip that one. I knew that would happen this week where we talk about them before, and I'd have to start skipping through. Take everyone who's playing the drinking game that I've just invented in this exact moment. Take a drink every time I start one, and then stop because I realise we've already talked about it. At London Comic Con 2015, Michael J. Fox admitted that his 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters in their teens and 20s, never saw the movie.
Oh, wow.
It's quite surprising to me. That's why I wrote that one. Now, this one we already have covered, but just to give it a little bit more detail. So Tom Wilson actually almost had his collarbone broken in the scene where Marty and Biff are about to fight in the cafeteria, as Eric Stoltz roughed up Tom for real. Take after take, despite repeated requests from Tom to tone down the aggression. Tom later said that he was going to return the favour during the filming of the car park scene outside the dance, but Eric was fired before that confrontation could take place. So that's just a little bit more detail about that scene. I love Nadia from where I am. Nadia. So now I'm recording this one in the living room. We don't normally do. Nadia obviously needed to move through the house, but she did it in sort of like a comedic, like cartoon tiptoe way. Like, you know, like a cartoon character is tiptoeing to be quiet. Like, I don't think she sort of like hunched over and like sort of do. Which made it so much more, like, less conspicuous. If she'd have just, like, walked through normally, I wouldn't have even noticed.
That's amazing.
Oh, that was good. I wish I could have filmed that. That was great. Anyway, so Huey Lewis was asked by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale to write a song for the film. However, they weren't that thrilled with the first song that Huey brought to them, and after explaining that what they were kind of hoping for, he came back with Power of Love, which is obviously exactly what they wanted, knocked it out of the park. They did also then ask for one more song, but he struggled to write one until he saw a cut of the film, which is where he then got the inspiration to do the film Back in Time, which kind of incorporates the which is kind of like, it feels like it sort of echoes the Alan Silvestri score for the film, which we'll talk about in a bit because that's an amazing score we haven't talked about yet. In the 1985 version of she's shot back across. It's like a scene from a horror movie, you know, where like a cat runs through the foreground and it's just a shadow. She's now telling me not to laugh at her. I'm sorry, Nadia. It was very funny. She's just accused me of being very funny in lieu of having anything else to say. She seems annoyed. That's great. Anyway, the 1985 version of Docs. Oh, this is great. So this one's a little bit of like continuity that I'd never noticed, and it took me reading the trivia to realize this. So the 1985 version of Doc's home is in a garage, right? And that's where Marty first goes and plays with that big speaker, yeah? In 1955, Doc's in a big house, like a mansion, but he has a big garage off the mansion, which is where they store the DeLorean, right? Mm. That's the same garage. The premise is that, and if you read the articles that are visible in the opening of the movie, the mansion itself had burnt down years before. The implication is that Doc burnt down his own home for the insurance money so he could fund his experiment and moved in, excuse me, to the garage.
Oh, that's cool.
And then sold the land around it, which is why it's all so much built up around it now.
Yeah, because isn't it like a Burger King or something now?
Yeah, it's like a Burger King. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
Which apparently they were just like, you don't need to pay us for using the location, just keep the shot of the Burger King in the movie.
Yeah, and I read about this, and the crew could park there and stuff, and yeah.
They were very accommodating apparently with Burger King, which is, it's nice of them. I mean, they got a promotion out of it, but you can't guarantee they're going to put your product on screen or anything in the movie, so they might not. They might have shot it in a way that never actually showed the Burger King at all. But
although a lot of people have accused it of product placement with Pepsi.
Pepsi, yes, yeah. Which, yeah. Although he does reference a tab at one point, which is apparently a drink for the gag, but apparently it's a drink owned by the Coca-Cola Corporation. So there's it's who knows. But apparently the thing with Pepsi that is more annoying, offensive to people, because Michael J. Fox had apparently been a Pepsi spokesman the year before. So there was a lot of, has he just carried this over? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah. So there you go. So he says it took him many years and his entire family fortune to afford to fund his Time Travel project, and the implication obviously being again that he sold that land. I just think that's really cool. I'd never noticed that before, and it took me reading the trivia to realize that was the case. I didn't realize the two garages were kind of the same thing on the same property. So there you go. There are only actually about 32 visual effects shots in the entire movie. This actually led to a very short turnover between production and release. It was released, Chris, just 9 weeks after it wrapped.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea.
Blimey.
Because there weren't that many special effects to actually complete. Subsequent two took a little bit more, but we'll come back to that, I guess. The movie holds the record for staying at number one at the box office for the longest 3 solid months. I assume that's a US record. But
yeah, I think so.
But 3 months, incredible to be at the number one spot for 3 months. A very brief scene was cut in I think we've talked about this. Yeah, the demo tape record company. We talked about that. Take a drink. The set for so there are 2 connections to this movie and Gremlins. I don't know if you know what they are.
No.
So the first one is that the set used for Kingston Falls in Gremlins, that snowy sort of like town center, is Hill Valley. It's the town center in Hill Valley. That's the same set, both on the Universal lot. And then additionally, Frances Lee McCain, who played Lorraine's mother in the dinner scene, she's Billy's mother, Lynn Peltzer in Gremlins.
Oh, cool.
So the cast went over. Would you like to hear several of the names that were considered for Doc Brown? There are lots. There are lots. It's incredible.
Hit me.
John Lithgow, Dudley Moore,
nice,
James Woods, Harold Ramis, Donald Sutherland, Albert Brooks, Chevy Chase, Steve Martin, Danny DeVito, and Jeff Goldblum.
I think Harold Ramis would have been an interesting choice.
Yep.
I actually think DeVito would have been an interesting choice as well, but none you feel would have been as amazing as Christopher Lloyd.
No, the ones that stand out to me is that I'd be interested in seeing potentially is Harold Ramis, Lithgow, and maybe Steve Martin.
Yeah.
I feel like Steve Martin could have brought something kind of weird to it that might have been good. But yeah.
I don't know if they're... Yeah. Steve Martin... I don't know if there would have been the warmth. There'd have been perhaps more zaniness, but yeah, it's just so hard to imagine it not being Lloyd and Fox, isn't it?
Well, yeah, 100%. Did you? Well, here we go. So we all know, obviously, about the Eric Stoltz situation. Did you know that someone else was cast as Marty?
Yeah, but I can't remember who.
And even rehearsed with Crispin Glover and Lea Thompson for 2 weeks prior to the shoot. C. Thomas Howell. Who I don't really know. I glanced at his IMDb page and nothing jumped out at me. Let me see it. Oh, he's in a bunch of stuff. He was in E.T. He was in The Amazing Spider-Man. All right, so he's
cool.
still he's a successful actor. Okay, cool. But yeah, he was actually rehearsing with them. He was gonna, and then the role went to Eric Stoltz after Mask became a surprise hit. And replaced him, and then obviously replaced Stoltz. It was all very chaotic. Yeah. People who were also considered for the role of Marty were early on were Charlie Sheen, And then this is my favourite one. Johnny Depp auditioned for the role of Marty McFly. But neither Gale nor Zemeckis remembered this until they found the notes from their casting sessions years later. And they've both said that it could not have been a very memorable audition if Johnny Depp walked in, didn't get the role, and they never even remembered that he'd been in to read for it.
Yeah.
So imagine that version of the movie.
Yeah, but Johnny Depp back then wasn't Johnny Depp now.
But wasn't he on 21 Jump Street at that point?
Yeah, that's 21 Jump Street, Nightmare on Elm Street, Johnny Depp is, or the night...
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street, Johnny Depp, which isn't as, it's not Edward Scissorhands or Captain
no,
Jack is.
Sure, but it's just funny that like he would have been a reasonably. I mean, he was 21 Jump Street was a big hit. Michael J. Fox was a big TV star. Johnny Depp certainly was too, and the fact that they don't even remember that he auditioned says a lot, I think.
Yeah.
Another interesting what if casting. Your boy Tim Robbins was nearly Biff Tannen.
Really? Oh, that'd have been cool. But again, as you said earlier, more than any other film we've done, like, you just go, it's that cast.
Yeah, without a question. So Eric Stoltz has actually stated that despite having worked on the film for several weeks, he has literally no memory of doing it.
Fair enough.
I'm not sure that's true. If I was guessing, I would say that it was all a bit of a shit show. It sounds to me like it was because Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis have always been absolute professionals and have said it just wasn't working. Tonally it was wrong for the movie. There were no problems with him or anything like that. It was just it just wasn't quite working. But the reports from elsewhere have always been that he was a bit of a nightmare on set. So
yeah, that it's hard not to imagine that's not like anything I've done for 5-6 weeks I've remembered. But hey.
Yeah. So it feels like that's just his tactical way of not actually discussing it. This was voted the 56th best screenplay of all time by the Writers Guild of America. Now, the reason this is on here is because I looked up that list, Chris, and there are 2 movies we've already reviewed ahead of it on the list. Can you guess what they are?
So remind me again, what's the list?
So this is the best screenplay of all time. So Back to the Future was voted 56th. 2 movies we've already reviewed came higher than it. I'll tell you their positions, 27th and 22nd.
Toy Story?
Nope.
The Shawshank Redemption?
Exactly, 22nd.
Groundhog Day?
27th, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The top 3 were Chinatown was 3rd, Godfather was 2nd, and Casablanca was voted the greatest screenplay of all time.
Good choices.
But yeah, Writers Guild of America, I thought that was interesting. Early scenes we've already talked about that one. Take a drink. Alan Silvestri composed a short jingle for the Back to the Future logo for the opening credits, but it ended up being scrapped. So that means his first piece of composition for the film doesn't appear till 18 minutes into the movie.
The music, though, is just incredible. So emotive, so just beautiful. And has been used. Like, I've seen that used as, like, the opening of concerts. Like, I think one of their Glastonbury gigs, Coldplay, like, walked onto the Back to the Future theme.
Yeah, it is genuinely one of the most, like, sort of, like... It's the big orchestral, the dun 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 dun, like it's just so dun dun dun. It's got such energy to it, like you just sort of want to go. Argh! Like I think that's one of the pieces to the recipe that makes that ending sequence, those final action moments, so engaging, despite the fact that they're going to win and succeed. It's just such a glorious and uplifting and sort of ass-kicking piece of music. Like, it's really hard to even put into words how that music makes you feel. And all the subtle cues and stuff are just really, like, perfect. An interesting thing about that as well, though, Steven Spielberg wasn't sure about hiring Alan Silvestri to do the movie. And when Spielberg sat to watch an early cut of the movie, some of it was temporary music, just standard stock stuff they dug out, and some of it was Silvestri's score that he was, halfway through working on. And Spielberg pointed out a bunch of points that he was like, that's the kind of music you need for the movie. And they were like, that stuff is Silvestri's. So Spielberg was like, okay, I'll shut up now then. So he, without knowing he was complimenting Silvestri's work, he was complimenting it, which is a really interesting story. Did you, Alan Silvestri, obviously, I didn't realize this. I was like, I know that name, Alan Silvestri. What else has he composed? Like, obviously a ton of stuff. He's a hugely successful composer, but he's the Avengers guy. You know that Avengers theme?
Oh wow!
Yeah, that's awesome. Because we were watching it, and I was like, Alan Silvestri. I've seen a movie with his name in the credits recently. I said that to Nadia. She's like, it's like, I know. Why? And I went on IMDb and I was like, yeah, we just watched like, Age of Ultron or whatever a week ago. We've been watching all the Marvel movies. We just watched Civil War. Oh boy, that's a fun movie.
That's a movie. That's a lot of movie.
He's an amazing composer.
Thor's return to Earth in Infinity War is just the perfect execution of the music in Avengers.
So good. I'm excited to get to that. We're working our way to it. Actually, no, we just watched Doctor Strange. The next one we're watching is Homecoming. So there you go. Anyway, nice. So in early drafts of the screenplay, the grown-up sort of version of George McFly, when he goes back and then goes forward again, wasn't a successful novelist, but actually a prize fighter. The idea being that he landed such a good punch on Biff that he started training and learning how to hone his fighting, I guess. I'm glad they stuck with the softer, he writes a nice love story and is a successful novelist. It's a much better idea.
It is a good punch, but yeah, same.
Yeah. So, other things that were different in the original script, obviously, as you've already talked about, the fridge. This is the last piece, by the way, trivia. This is stuff that's from the original script. They did have a monkey. The monkey was going to replace Einstein. I think the premise was that if he's going back in time to see younger Doc, if he has a dog or a cat, it'd have to be a different dog or cat because dogs and cats don't live that long. But I think the thinking behind giving him a monkey was that it could be the same animal in the past because they live longer.
That makes sense.
The studio apparently were like, no one watches movies with monkeys. Like, there'd been a history of like movies that had flopped that had monkeys in them. And you know how studios sometimes just draw lines between really incongruous things, and they just go, oh, that must mean that we can't put monkeys in movies anymore because they don't work. People don't watch monkey movies. So yeah, apparently that was the decision, so they changed it to a dog. Also in the original script, I didn't realize this, Marty had been playing rock and roll at the dance actually caused a riot that had to be broken up by the police. This, combined with Marty accidentally tipping Doc off to the secret ingredient that made the time machine work, Coca-Cola, made history change so that when Marty got back to the 80s, he found it was now a 1950s conception of that decade with air cars and whatnot and all this other stuff that had been invented by Doc Brown. So basically, Marty gave Doc too many of his own technological secrets, and that meant Doc could invent a bunch of stuff early, and the future was now this weird 1950s science fiction future when he went back.
Yeah, for the reasons discussed earlier with the Biff thing, I'm glad that it was more subtle than that.
Yeah. The other big change is that because Marty caused a riot with rock music, it basically never became big and was basically never invented. So the movie ended with him dedicating himself to starting the delayed cultural revolution. Meanwhile, and then another bit that was in the original script was that one of the ending scenes was George McFly finding a newspaper from the day of the dance and seeing a picture of his son in the riot.
Oh, wow. I'm glad again they didn't go down that route.
Yeah, all of that is really interesting, but very different. Like, I don't think I don't like the idea that Marty goes back to the future and it's all technologically enhanced because Doc pushed it forward. I don't particularly like the idea of ending on like a teaser for a storyline that's not resolved of his dad finding out that his son time traveled. I'm not sure I like that Marty has to restart rock music. So many ideas. Yeah, they're all interesting, but none of them really work in this movie.
Especially with like how much nitpicking people have done in the actual what we got. Like I read that a few people were like, where did like the hairdryer come from? Like the hairdryers weren't invented then when Marty scares George with the hairdryer and the Walkman. But there's a deleted scene, which I've actually seen because it's on the DVDs. There's a deleted and the Blu-rays. There's a deleted scene where Doc is getting the stuff out of future Doc's suitcase, and within that suitcase is a hairdryer.
That's clever. I didn't know that.
What's used? Yeah. So given that people were nitpicking, going, "Where'd the hairdryer come from?" Yeah, the idea of him restarting rock and roll. Yeah, I'm glad we didn't go down that route.
Yeah, me too. So much of that, like, just it all again feels really interesting. But again, the foresight of the people involved, they knew what worked and they made their adjustments, and what we got was this absolutely incredible piece of cinema. I mean, I think it's fair to say that one of the most influential films in both mine and Chris's lives, and certainly one of the greatest movies ever made. I mean, it is that simple, isn't it? It's you can code it, you can dress it up all you like and say, oh, it's one of the most this and that, and be more specific. One of the greatest casts ever assembled on it. But I think just flat out, it is one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And one of the most incredible executions of a vision.
My enthusiasm for it is being nothing but increased by watching it again. Even though I've watched this every good couple of years.
Yeah,
there's a reason to watch, but I've seen this one in the cinema, because they re-released it a while back. So yeah,
didn't they do it in 2015, the actual year that they go doing the?
I think so. I don't know if maybe that is when I saw it. Then that would be 5 years ago now.
Because that's when I last saw it. I went to the cinema and saw it there. I also got the luxury of I've seen Gremlins on a cinema screen. I've seen Terminator on a cinema screen, because basically Gremlins I saw at the Prince Charles, but Terminator and the original Ghostbusters I saw it on a big screen when we lived in Bournemouth, because the cinema there did like a week of airing classic movies. Like they got hold of old canisters of classic movies and actually traditionally projected them. Just an incredible way to watch any of those movies, to be honest with you. I've also had the luxury of seeing a lot of these films on the big screen, but it's definitely worth, if you can find any of these movies on these sort of classics, where anyone's projecting them traditionally, like particularly the Prince Charles in London is a great place to go and see that sort of thing. I recommend you do it.
So looking it up, it was the 25th anniversary. They digitally restored and remastered it for theatrical release in the US, the UK, and Italy. And
when
then
that
was in 2010.
So that was
that was in 2010.
Right.
And then in 2015, on the date depicted in part 2, the entire trilogy was re-released theatrically for one day to celebrate the film's 30th anniversary.
There you go.
So yes, it looks like they did it twice, 2010 and 2015. Well, there's no mention of the UK in the 2015 one, but it sounds like from what your memory is that did happen over here. So,
yeah, because that's the one I remember. But that actually lines up with the removal of the to be continued, because the 2010 digital re-release or whatever you were trying, that was around the time that I'd read that they removed the to be continued from part 1. So that's the version that's on Amazon, and it's my DVDs, which come from the mid 2000s, are from prior to that digital remastering, therefore have the to be continued at the end of part 1.
Yeah. Which I think is fine. Like it went on to become a trilogy. I think that's
Yeah, I know, but it's that whole thing of like going back and making a change to it. You kind of want to watch it the way it was presented to people in the original thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it works either way. It doesn't really matter. So it's kind of irrelevant.
So there we go. And as Dan has said, next week, part 2.
Yeah. Speaking of to be continued, come back next week to hear us talk about part 2. I assume it'll be I'd be jinxing us to say it, but I'd assume there'd be less to say, because we've covered so much about the franchise in general in this one, but who knows?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say about the film, and the fact that it was both of us would have named it as our favourite film up until a few weeks ago is going to make for an interesting discussion. I think
it'll be more. Yeah, it'll be less focused on the history of the franchise and the acting changes and all that stuff, and it'll be more about that exact movie.
Well, there's a fair. To be honest with you, if any of them are going to be quite light potentially, although it's us, so probably not. It's probably going to be part 3, although we'll probably do trilogy stuff in that, because there's obviously with Crispin Glover, there's a fair amount of behind the scenes stuff to talk about with part 2 as well.
Yeah. So there's so we'll catch up with that next week. So yeah, thanks for watching. Obviously, if you'd like to hear part 2, you can hear it right now. Go over to our Patreon. give us as little as $1, and you can get access to that. Everything's been going up a week early with Rewind reviews over there. When we finish this trilogy, we are going to take a break. Just to give people a heads up on that now, from Rewind Reviews, we're calling this the second series. I don't know, but that's the structure we're going with. It's like we're gonna have little chunks where we do sort of 10-ish episodes, and then come back. So yeah, we're and there's so many films I'm really excited to get to as well, even beyond these. So. This isn't going anywhere for a little while because I'm having too much fun. I don't even care that barely anyone's listening. I've enjoyed it too much. Yeah. There you go. So thanks very much for listening. Cool. Chris ends this one, so I'll hand it over to him.
I'm Chris Billingham
and Ben Doolan,
and this review has been Rewound.